Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Executive Explainer Briefing. Today we're putting on our strategic consultant hats to really dig into a massive economic forecast, the top 10 pharmaceutical companies in the world projected for 2026. Because if you want to understand exactly where global health, scientific innovation, and some seriously heavy capital are all intersecting over the next few years, you absolutely have to look at these revenue leaders. We're going to break down the data, map out the industry shifts, and see who is best positioned to dominate the market. All right, let's dive right in.
So, here's our roadmap for the briefing. We're covering the 2026 pharma landscape, the massive drivers of obesity and oncology, the billion-dollar leaders, the global divide between the US and Europe, and finally, the competitive middle tier.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the 2026 pharma landscape. To really grasp the power dynamics at play here, we need to establish the baseline for these projections, which are based entirely on projected annual prescription drug and vaccine revenues. Now, just to wrap your head around the sheer financial gravity of this market, think about this number, $65.2 billion. That is the projected annual revenue for just the single #1 company on our 2026 list. Just sit with that for a second. We aren't talking about a decade of sales here, we're talking about one single year of revenue from prescription drugs and vaccines. It creates this incredibly massive barrier to entry. Just to compete at the very top of this industry requires astronomical capital and global market reach. Honestly, breaking into this top 10 is no small feat. We are dealing with the absolute titans of the industry. But you might be wondering, what exactly is driving these mind-boggling numbers? Well, it's not just legacy drugs. We're seeing a fundamental shift in what the global population needs and what modern science can actually deliver. And that brings us perfectly to Section 2, drivers, obesity, and oncology.
The whole industry right now is basically split down two distinct clinical paths to market dominance. On one side, you've got the intensely high-demand GLP-1 treatments. These are the groundbreaking therapies targeting obesity and diabetes. The global demand we are seeing here is just staggering. And then, on the other side, you have companies building these massive, highly sophisticated oncology pipelines to fight various forms of cancer. The big takeaway here is that whether a company is treating ubiquitous, lifestyle-impacting conditions like obesity or complex, life-threatening diseases like cancer, those are the two primary engines driving this phenomenal revenue growth as we head toward 2026.
So let's move along to Section 3, the billion-dollar leaders. It's time to see who is actually capturing all this value at the very top.
The projections reveal a remarkably tight race at the summit. These are your top 3 global players for 2026. At number 1, we have Eli Lilly, projecting $65.2 billion. But breathing right down their neck is Pfizer at $62.58 billion, and incredibly close behind them is AbbVie at $61.16 billion. I mean, we are looking at razor-thin margins here. In an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars, the gap between the gold, silver, and bronze spots is just a few billion dollars.
Let's break down what actually puts Eli Lilly in that coveted #1 spot. It ties directly back to those drivers we just discussed. Lilly is leaning on absolute dominance in endocrinology. Their heavy hitters, Mounjaro and Zepbound. Those are the highly sought-after GLP-1 treatments that are practically flying off the shelves. But they aren't stopping there. They're also aggressively positioned in Alzheimer's disease therapeutics. So, by capturing massive market share and building a really deep, strategic moat in two of the highest-need therapeutic areas in medicine today, they've completely locked in that top projection.
But man, the challengers are formidable. Let's look at Pfizer and AbbVie. Pfizer's projecting over $62 billion by focusing heavily on vaccines, specifically Comirnaty, and really bolstering their oncology portfolio through that massive Seagen acquisition. AbbVie, on the flip side, is commanding their $61 billion projection through sheer force in immunology. That's driven by powerhouse drugs like Skyrizi and Rinvoq, alongside a really strong neuroscience portfolio. So you have 3 totally different companies with 3 very distinct strategic focuses, all pulling in over $60 billion in projected revenue. Which leads us straight into Section 4, Global Divide, US versus Europe. We've talked revenue, we've talked science, but as strategic consultants, we really need to look at the geography here.
Geographically, we are seeing a super fascinating dynamic. Out of the top 10 projected pharmaceutical companies globally, the United States holds a really clear majority with 6 companies. The European market claims the other 4 spots. Now, this highlights a massive concentration of pharmaceutical headquarters, capital, and pipeline development centered right in the US, but it also proves that Europe maintains an unshakable, heavyweight presence at the top table.
When you actually map out these US heavyweights against the European contenders, it is a high-stakes transatlantic competition. You've got Eli Lilly, Pfizer, AbbVie, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, and Bristol-Myers Squibb facing off against cross-border powerhouses. We're talking AstraZeneca representing the UK and Sweden, Roche and Novartis out of Switzerland, and Sanofi from France. While the US definitely has the sheer volume of companies in the top 10, those 4 European firms are absolute heavy hitters, holding their own in the tens of billions.
Let's transition to Section 5, the competitive middle tier. Though to be fair, middle is a pretty funny word when you're dealing with this much capital. Let's do a rapid-fire summary of the pipeline strategies securing this incredibly tight $57 to $60 billion tier. Just below the top 3, Johnson & Johnson secures $60.4 billion through innovative medicine and super diverse medical tech. Trailing by just a fraction is AstraZeneca at $58.74 billion, prioritizing rare diseases and biopharma. Then Merck leverages their massive Keytruda asset to hit $58.14 billion, while Switzerland's Roche rounds out this bracket at $57.57 billion with advanced diagnostics. The competition here is absolutely fierce, with practically every company heavily indexing on oncology to secure their cash flow.
Now, rounding out our elite global leaders, we have rankings 8 through 10. And I really want to emphasize that even the quote-unquote bottom of this specific list represents a staggering economic floor, ranging from $47 to $54 billion. This level of sustained, massive capital is exactly what funds the relentless research and development required to actually push global healthcare forward.
To efficiently wrap up our company breakdown, let's look at the specialized therapeutic focus areas that are anchoring this final tier. Novartis is projecting $54.53 billion by focusing heavily on cardiovascular health, immunology, and neuroscience. Bristol-Myers Squibb sits at $48.19 billion, driven by oncology, immunology, and cell therapy. And finally, holding that number 10 spot globally is France's Sanofi at $47.42 billion, powered by immunology and vaccines, most notably Dupixent. Even at number 10, the strategic focus remains completely locked on complex, high-demand therapeutics. So all of this leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question. We've seen the 2026 projections. We know that GLP-1s and oncology are completely running the board right now, but science moves fast, really fast. Based on the billions being poured into these pipelines across the US and Europe, who among these 10 titans is going to discover the next unprecedented breakthrough that totally rewrites these rankings by 2030? The revenues we've looked at today are massive, but the ultimate impact on our global healthcare systems is what truly matters in the end. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer briefing, and keep your eyes on these top 10 because this race is just getting started.